All right, up next, we have Andrew Lumsden. Andrew Lumsden advises corporate clients in all aspects of mergers and acquisitions and corporate and securities law. He has a 20-year reputation for delivering high-quality results in groundbreaking transactions. Andrew is the co-chair of CORE's China Practice Group from 1998 to 2001. He's also the chief of staff of the Honorable Joe Hockney MP, then Minister for Financial Services and Regulation. He's also a member of the Professional Standards Council. Andrew advises corporate clients in all aspects of mergers and acquisitions and corporate governance, as well as contested and negotiated takeovers, fundraising, and corporate and securities law matters. He has an acknowledged expertise in real estate, infrastructure, energy and resources, and media, having advised many players in these sectors. Andrew is involved in 3 planned ICOs and has recently published ICOs Are Everywhere and Nowhere. How do you regulate a blockchain? Please welcome Andrew Lumsden.
Thanks very much, Graham. I'll just switch myself on. In a deeply personal way. Hopefully that's better. Okay, so this is kind of a huge and complex topic. So what I'm going to give is pretty much a Cook's tour, and so I should sort of say at the beginning there are a range of really complicated questions. A lot of them I am not going to be able to answer in relation to particular things. But what I'm trying to do is just sort of paint for you the kind of broad landscape of where the existing regulatory regime sits in relation to ICOs. This presentation, this Prezi is actually in the cloud, and I'm pretty sure I haven't restricted it, but when I go back, I'll make sure I'm restricted. So if you just search it up, anything you want, you should be able to just get straight away from that. Sorry if you don't like Prezi, they do have a nasty habit of making you airsick, but you know, other than that, for me, it's a handy way to put things on paper. So what I wanted to sort of set this sort of as a sort of broad schematic, if you like, in terms of blockchain. We're already seeing a number of kind of innovations in relation to blockchain and its application to the securities market. I mean, there's been a lot said as to where it might go, but you know, interestingly, even sort of relatively dull jurisdictions like Delaware realise the importance of getting ahead of the curve, and a place like Delaware has been the first significant corporate jurisdiction that actually has legislation that incorporates the concept that you can register shares on a blockchain. Right? So that currently wouldn't be the case in Australia. I have written and pleaded with the Minister here for us to sort of make some sort of relatively minor changes, but at the moment it still needs to basically be in a form that's capable of being printed out in order to meet your Corporations Act requirements. So, you know, we're getting there, but it's slow. Right? And you know, people, I think, you know, we heard some of the comments before about, you know, concerns around voting. You know, this is, again, you know, there's a hell of a lot of money tied up, a hell of a lot of existing processes. So it will take time. But we see things like ASX that announce that they want to take it to the blockchain. So there's no doubt that there's a kind of a recognition that there's a sort of logic behind it, and that that's where it's going to go. And I think that basically, you know, the reasons why you're all probably pretty familiar with, but the obvious places where they're going to have big impacts, I think, will be stock exchanges, as I said, we've seen ASX, insurers, rating agency, banks and governments, just in terms of, you know, that verification function that a properly operating blockchain has the potential to kind of remove. And I think that the first impact that we'll see in the securities market is on contracting, clearing, settling and record keeping. That's the kind of, if you like, the dull side of it. And there's a lot more potential for smart contracts and blockchain to get together and for all sorts of clever things to happen. You know, I had a guy come talk to me the other day who is looking at an ICO for a small coal mine that produces a particular kind of coal that there's a very high demand for. And what they're looking at is whether or not we can shape a coin with a smart contract attached to it that will actually give you an entitlement to output from the coal, and you can then trade the coin as effectively a direct synthetic for coal, which is interesting. But you know, again, when we kind of picked into it a bit, I'd have to say that some of the technology was aspirational. But I think where the big area in terms of what we were talking about today and what I wanted to just sort of explore with you is the kind of the new concepts. You know, the old model for access to growth capital was pretty well a well-trodden route, and everybody kind of understood it. And you kind of had a relatively small raising of angels who kind of got you your kind of base capital, got to a kind of a sort of viable idea, if you like. Venture capital then took you to sort of a minimum viable product, and then, you know, if you had something to go, then in a lot of cases you then went to initial public offerings. And a lot of that, you know, the fact that we see all the unicorns and a lot of people who chose not to take the last step sort of tells you some of the problems that are embedded in that model. But now I think, you know, the token market and the whole prospect of ICOs is actually changing things quite dramatically. You know, we're already seeing a lot of VC funds are changing their rules because their existing mandates wouldn't have let them invest in ICOs. So a number of them are changing the terms of their mandates so they can invest in ICOs. Similarly, there are some specific VC funds floating around now that do nothing but invest in ICOs. So there's definitely kind of a groundswell, if you like, moving in that direction. But that, you know, it's not without its risks. I think we're already seeing, you know, in certain circumstances, the DAO situation where, you know, there's already kind of a level of skepticism. The regulators are very nervous about it. You know, they spent a long time putting it together what I think is a completely unworkable crowdfunding kind of model. And, you know, this technology, if you like, just has the potential to kind of leave that ball behind. The whole kind of clunkiness, if you like, of the kind of crowdfunding, and the reason why it hasn't been widely accepted in Australia is largely because the regulator just can't keep its hands off it, right? Because, you know, we live in an environment where somebody's going to go broke, or, you know, somebody's going to put their entire life savings into an ICO. It's going to go belly up, and then they're going to scream, and there'll be horrible pictures on Current Affair or somebody or other about how all these people robbed them, and they'll go, we need regulation, we need to be protected. Nobody says, well, why'd you put your entire life savings into one product? You know, that question can't be asked. But that's where you get it, right? That's the kind of regulatory environment we live in. We've got to be careful. I'd have to say, for my sins, I have now read about 20 white papers. I'm sure there are people who've read more, but they are not paragons of virtue, right? They are hard to read, they are difficult. I'm sure it's a bit like what I call bird blindness. People who do it all the time, they fill in all the gaps and it makes sense to them, but from a regulator or a retail investor looking at them, it's hard to read. It's hard to kind of basically understand what the proposition is and where you're going. And I think that will be a problem. I think in time, the quality of the disclosure in white papers and the quality of the DD around what's in them. I mean, I can tell you the kind of language that you see used in them, you wouldn't see in many other security offerings anywhere, right? It's just, as I say, go back, it's kind of aspirational, it's very loose, and you know, if you took those documents to a litigator and started talking to them, right, they would fall off their chair with like a Linda Blair kind of head-spinning, vomiting kind of thing going on. You guys are going to go. And we've already seen a number of issuers who've gone bust. Caveat emptor is certainly the watchword, but that won't last long because there'll be this kind of, there'll be a backlash. There is already a backlash. You've seen SEC, ASIC, everybody coming out making noises in this ICO market. Google, Facebook thing is just the very top of a very big iceberg, I suspect. And I think that, you know, based on what I've seen, most of the ICOs, it looks a lot more like punting than investing. Right? Now, there's nothing wrong with punting as long as you know what you're doing. So there's a real kind of regulatory lag, right? The regulators are playing catch up. And I feel that they're sort of a bit like Alice, you know, in this scenario. They really just want to be seen to be going somewhere. They don't actually know what they're doing, they don't really care what they're doing, but they have to be seen to be going somewhere. And I think there's a lot of noise, particularly from the more mainstream regulators, SEC and ASIC, Singapore, similar. It's really just, they're sort of pegging out the ground, but they've got no idea where to go. And actually, this is a place where ultimately the solution will not come from regulators. I think there'll be a need for sort of, hopefully somebody in some government somewhere to kind of step up and go, we've got to sort of start to reset how this works, because the existing models, you keep trying to jam these things into the existing model, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute, you're going to have trouble. So this is kind of the existing model, if you like, right? So that basically our law regulates financial products, which are hugely widely drawn, right? That is a big problem for anybody who wants to go into this market, right? A facility through which the acquisition of which a person makes an investment, manages investment, or makes a non-cash payment. So that is going to catch most things. Now, famously, that even called funding agreements, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So it's then kind of broken out. You've got securities, which sort of fall into these three buckets: shares, debentures, and managed investment schemes. Then you've got derivatives. A lot of ICOs also have characteristics of derivatives, particularly the key issue around a derivative is that it's pegged for something. So it's a sort of synthetic, if you like, for another thing. That kind of gives it, if it's got a reference asset, they call it, that's probably going to make it a derivative, so you have to apply it. But the biggest problem for most people is going to be this, right? And when you go and talk to a lawyer about an ICO and they start talking about managed investment schemes, everybody's head's going to spin. It's because it's hard, right? This concept was designed for fruit farms, listed property trusts, all sorts of existing kind of collective investment vehicles, right? And so what the law says is, in circumstances where we've got a whole bunch of people coming together to aggregate their capital and share in something that's going on, right? What we're going to do is we're going to impose all these rules. Firstly, whoever's managing it can't own it in their own name. They've got to protect it for everybody else, so they've got to use a custodian. Right? So all the assets have to be registered and put in the hands of a custodian to protect you, the manager, from interfering with the pool's asset. Secondly, we're going to invent this thing called a responsible entity. And those people have an AFSL license, Australian Financial Service license, AFSL. And you've got to have an approved trustee. All right? So when I talk to people looking at ICOs and say, well, you're going to have a custodian, a responsible entity, and a trustee, they pretty much pack up their folders and walk out again, right? So we've got to talk about this. This is kind of a real underlying problem with the machinery, if you like, of corporate regulation in Australia. Right? I'll talk about some of the other options that are around. But trying to shoehorn things into that model is incredibly difficult. And why a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to make sure that whatever they're doing, it is a managed investment scheme. Which is a big problem, because the language of the section is so widely drawn as to catch most things. Now famously, in a case they call multiplex, the full federal court, so it's like a judicial body of pretty serious weight, said that a bunch of disparate investors who had entered into funding agreements in relation to litigation they were running against multiplex for non-disclosure around certain corporate events were in a managed investment scheme. So I'm not trying to teach you the law here, I'm just trying to give you a sense of the breadth, right? So if you met 10 people with a contract with one person and you said, oh, we're all involved in this piece of litigation, that wouldn't in your ordinary course, you would think, constitute contribution and fraud. Full federal court, we're stuck with it. And in fact, the ASIC kind of bent the law to say that litigation funders were no longer caught, but it's a real problem. It's a big problem for most people looking at ICOs, and there are, I would say, some robust advices. I don't think my PI insurers would like to have my name on them in terms of some of the advice I've seen around people doing things that aren't managed investment schemes. Right? And I know ASIC's currently looking at least 2 existing IPOs, which they've got a very firm view are managed investment schemes. Right? And the consequences are all horrendous. Right? Jail, handle the money back, blah, 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 right? Anytime you start talking to a lawyer and they start talking about, where's your toothbrush, you want to be careful. And from my perspective, for people involved, there's also a whole bunch of horrible aiding and abetting offences that you don't want to get involved in, right? So it is very serious stuff. And a lot of it was set up deliberately to try and avoid people scamming, right? So that the consequences are serious, the prosecution will be serious, it will not be a nice day out if you fall foul of those provisions. Derivatives, I've talked about. Really, it's just this concept of a reference asset is the key thing you need to think about. So if you're issuing an agreement with somebody that's referable to something else, so that doesn't mean, for instance, if you're in the market selling a coin for $5 US, right, that isn't a derivative. Right? It's a thing. You give me $5, I give you this thing, right? That's not a derivative, right? But if I say to you, in the future, the value of this coin is pegged to the value of the US dollar, that's a derivative. It's the forward-looking element of it. It's the connection to a reference asset. And again, there's a lot of coins floating around that I've seen, and had I understood the white papers better, but I think what they were doing looked an awful lot like a derivative. The one that really annoys me is the kind of wide definition of financial product, right? And one of the problems with that definition is this concept of a non-cash payment facility, right? So a lot of marketplaces, a lot of coin offerings have embedded in them some element of a marketplace where you can trade the coin and deal with the coin. That's potentially problematic. And it's problematic because the definition includes this non-cash payment facility, right? And crypto is not currency. I can bore you on that subject for another hour or two if you want to, but right now let's just trust me on that. Cryptos aren't currency. That's the rule of the taxman. That's the rule. As far as the ASIC and the taxman are concerned, that it's a sort of a barter current situation. So the problem is that this non-cash payment facility has already gone as far as to cash loyalty cards. Right? ASIC's view is that it applies to loyalty cards. So they have a series of exemptions that are already in place for people who are operating loyalty cards to make sure they don't fall within the financial product. Because once you're a financial product, then the licensing, all of this stuff we've talked about kicks in. So again, on 2 ICOs I'm looking at the moment, we're working pretty hard to sort of look at how we can decouple the kind of non-cash payment facility aspect from the coin offering so as not to be caught into this particular space. But it is again a kind of a provision of quite wide breadth, and one where you need to be a bit careful because the loyalty card piece is actually, in terms of the carve-out, is also very narrowly drawn. I was hoping to be able to shoehorn 1 or 2 of them into that, but again, it's very much, it's got to be kind of product acquisition related, and it's got to kind of tie back in. One of the things that kicks in once you've crossed that threshold into a financial product, then you deal with this whole nasty of a financial market. If you've got a financial product and you're trading a financial product, that becomes a financial market. Once you're a financial market, then there's a whole bunch of rules that kick in. That's kind of relatively, I don't know, from my perspective, for what it's worth, I kind of think about the ICO world in kind of 3 layers, kind of probably a pyramid. The top are the currencies, Bitcoin, etc., that's a pure kind of currency play, if you like. The middle bit are all the kind of what you call the platforms. Where do things trade? How do buyers and meet sellers? And then the third layer down is the bigger layer, which are the kind of people who are using the first 2 to offer products. products or services. Right? And I think that bottom layer is going to be a killing ground. You know, there'll be tens of thousands of new offerings and billions of dollars raised, and not many are going to be here in 12 months, 18 months, 2 years' time, right? But some will emerge out of that for sure. That's kind of the nature of the market. Again, this is a topic on which you can spend months, but the law on extraterritoriality is this. ASIC can reach out to you wherever you are, whatever you're doing, if there is a sufficiently close connection to Australia. Right? So if you're in Vanuatu offering shares or coins to Australian residents, they'll get you. Right? They will come after you and get you. And despite the fact that extraterritoriality has limitations, in most situations it won't be a very effective place to hide. Right? It's because they don't actually care too much where the product is. I mean, you're really the ASX, right? There's 160 companies on ASX today whose primary asset is in Africa. All of the goodies, all the things that derive value are in Africa. Right? We don't have any hesitation about regulating those companies. There are 70 odd companies that are not in Australia. Not an Australian company, so they're foreign companies as well. So there's already a kind of embedded element of extraterritoriality in the way we regulate. Look, without this is where I think the sort of industry has got to get better, right? As I said to you, the white papers are on the whole, and they will not survive any kind of serious scrutiny, and when it goes south, and you're unlucky enough to be the person who somebody's sticking a microphone in front of your face, and I've got a bit of experience in that world, it's a pretty horrible day out, right? You know, they'll pick bits and pieces out of it and say, you said you do this, you do this, you took all of Mrs. Kafux's money and blew it on Coca-Cola and pizza for your designers. No. So, you know, you do need a kind of process that looks something like this. Right? Now, this is a standard kind of offering model. To anybody who's ever been involved in a share issue, this is kind of what you'd see. But I've tweaked this model a bit more around, a bit more specifically for a kind of ICO/white papering offering. And again, look, it's not a complete solution, right? And in a lot of ways, the law doesn't ding you for getting it wrong, right? Losing people's money isn't necessarily what the law's there to stop you doing, right? If people are stupid enough to invest it, by and large, the law tries to say, okay, that's all right. But if you don't have a process, if you can be shown to be kind of not have stepped through and tried to make sure it was as good as it could be, then you'll be in trouble. That's general. Again, that's not necessarily going to say that you can have to take a toothbrush to a meeting with a lawyer. And so I think, you know, part of that is to really start to think about best practices in terms of consumer protection. Right? So that's what we've talked about. You know, have you got a complaints process? Are you dealing with people's price properly? Right? Once you start engaging with people on this kind of basis, you need to have some processes around what you're doing and how. Right? Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be the world's best, but you need to have sort of stepped it through and thought about it in a way that's kind of transparent and understandable. Yeah, so we talked a little around this, the problem of the managed investment model, and it's kind of in that category of, you know, when people come and say, I don't want to do this, but I don't want it to be an ICO, I go, no problem, 6 impossible things before breakfast, I can do. So there are some other options and some other ways to think about it. So let me take you through those. Sandbox. No doubt you've heard ASIC's got this sandbox. It's a great idea, but it doesn't work. Basically, problem is sandbox stuff is really largely still at this stage fixed on around licensing. It's very much designed. If you're into fintech and the fintech's what you want to do, you can go into a sandbox and you can work in that kind of environment to do the product development. But if you want to raise money for a fintech, not going to work. Because it's all about whether or not you need licensing. Right? The whole sandbox focus at the moment is around licensing. There's no indication yet that ASIC want to take that anywhere else. Crowdsource, I think I've already given you a sense of my belief in the value of crowdsource, but again, it's pretty limited. Right? There are very specific, narrow rules around. You can't be raising more than 5 million. You can't have more than 25 in assets. You've got to do it through a platform with somebody who's got an own FSL. I mean, it may be that this is a place where somebody will put the time and energy to package up solutions around that. It might work, but once you get past that 5 million, and I mean, there are a lot of people out there now. I mean, the power gen guys, they did 30 odd mil, you know, which so they couldn't do it, right? So depending on what your needs are, I guess, but I think that there's real limitations in the current crowdsourcing model that they're going to get you there. Under the existing MIS regime, there is this concept of a corporate collective investment vehicle. I should say that this stuff is right out on the edge, right? This is kind of me making it up. I've been looking at ways to solve this problem of the fact that the architecture doesn't work, and some of the things I've been playing with are in this space. So I'm not saying it does work. You could put this down as vaporware back in the old days, right? It's got the concept that it might work, but I can't guarantee it. It's not even a minimum viable product state, right? This is just an idea. But there is this new existing legislation which talks about, so essentially you'd use a corporate vehicle. You could wrap a corporate vehicle into an ICO and use that as a mechanism to do it. This is my most off-the-wall idea, though, and the one I think that most likely is the place to go, right? Which is to use the existing corporate cooperative legislation as a way to wrap the theory behind most asset-style ICOs. Right? I'll explain the kind of differentiation if you like, but if you think about a lot of what is promised by the blockchain, by smart contracts, by ICOs, it is not far from what we used to in the old days call a wet co-op. Right? And a wet co-op basically meant that you had an entitlement to you put products in to the co-op, and you got an entitlement to the aggregated benefit of the co-op out. And your contribution in to the co-op set your entitlement to the aggregated pool out. So there were two co-ops. We can go on again, but just briefly, a dry co-op is like what the milk co-ops ultimately have moved into now. All the milk co-ops are now pretty much dry. You just have shares. And it doesn't actually matter too much how much milk you deliver. Right? Your entitlement to the proceeds of the co-op is just driven by how many share units you have. Right? But there was a lot more wet co-ops in the old days where you'd have an entitlement that came out of share and entitlement by reference to how much product you put in. So if you think about that sort of conceptually in the context of what some of people are trying to do and where I think ultimately the real power of this stuff is, it's much more analogous to that kind of model than the sort of standard static. Here's a share, here's an entitlement to a 1 million share in the aggregate proceeds. The co-op legislation was also amended a couple of years ago to use this cooperative capital unit as a vehicle to allow them to raise capital, because the problem with them previously was they had limited capacity to raise capital. So, I think, and the other thing that's beautiful about that is I don't have to convince every state. I don't have to go to Canberra. If I start to get one consumer affairs department in one state think this is a good idea, they can use their own legislative power to tweak this legislation to do what I want to do in ICO. right? So the capacity for us to be a bit more nimble is substantial. And I think that is one of the problems that Australian corporate law, I can go on about this, but has suffered from, is that we don't have that competitive dynamic that you see in America between the states, where there's an ongoing battle between Delaware and New York to kind of who's got the best corporate law, you know, how do we tweak it, how do we meet the market's needs and still protect investor concern. Our system is much more rigid, so it's much harder for us to deal with that. And this might be a place where you could use a bit of competitive tension between the states to kind of come up with a better model. Talked about that. Yeah, well, I'm sure there might be something else. I haven't yet thought about it, but, you know, I always like to leave a space in case, you know, on the way here I had another idea, but not yet. I want to just touch on this because I think this is clever, right? And I think that the Swiss are getting in the right place, and I suspect that this model might get replicated. If I had to back one idea that I thought would come up, I reckon it'll be this, right? And basically what they've done is that they've kind of broken down the universe of ICOs into these three categories, right? You've got payment ICOs, asset ICOs, and utility ICOs, right? Payment ICOs are essentially currency, right? And essentially what the regulator's saying there, it's a currency, it's a currency, it's a currency, right? You're dealing in a currency, you do what you do, right? We're not really interested in it. We're not seeking to regulate it. You buy a currency, you trade it on a market, that's a matter for you. And it's entirely, the only kind of regulatory oversight, if you like, will be the markets through which it trades, because there are already rules around markets, rigging markets, you know, market manipulation, all that sort of good stuff that already exists in foreign exchange and other currency markets. And AML, CTF. Now, again, that's a big topic, but essentially, any time you're kind of dealing in substantial amounts of money, you're going to have to think about how you're going to deal with anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism funding kind of regulation. Right? There's a whole raft of stuff around that. AUSTRAC are probably further down this path than anybody in terms of really having done some serious thinking about it. And they've already got some legislative amendments out, and they're thinking in terms of, at this point, the only time that you've got an AUSTRAC obligation will be when you convert it, right? So when you empty when the wallet goes to a market, gets cash. At that point, in the current model, AUSTRAC's cash, right? And you've got reporting obligations and you'll have to notify client. But what I'm advising my clients and what I would recommend to all of you is when you're setting these things up and you're thinking about it, watch that. Right? Think about that aspect. Embed within your terms of service rules around know your client. Give yourself some flexibility so that, because this is going to change. There's nothing sure. You know, even I saw some testimony from one genius senator in California the other day going, you know, what do we need the blockchain for? What do we need? I said, I don't see what's wrong with US dollars. Kind of, you know. To which I commented, I thought all the dinosaurs were in the La Brea tar pit, and they didn't think that was very funny. Then the second category is these utility ICOs. They provide access to a platform or service. They don't qualify as securities because it's totally about sort of digital access rights. If you like, think of the PowerTel, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the PowerTel fund model, but basically they were kind of trying to use, the idea was to use the blockchain as a way for people to trade excess power and to then aggregate the power and sell the power out into the market. That's probably a way oversimplification of it. Something that was way cleverer than that, but that's kind of how I look at it. I'm pretty simple. And in that situation, then what the Swiss are saying that they're pretty fine with that, provided you sort of meet all the normal disclosure products rules. They're not seeking to regulate that in any material way, right? Because it's an access right. Okay, so these are the utility ICO. And the third and possibly most dangerous category are asset ICOs, right? Which come back to more what we've been talking around, things that are more in the nature of managed investing. Those, they will treat them as securities and will have prospectus requirements and all of that good stuff. Right? So to me, that seems like a pretty fundamental, sensible model, consistent with what we already know and love. We may need to tweak it, but I would have thought if you sat down and said, that's kind of where we'd like to take it, and what architecture do we need to kind of provide, short form prospectus, simple online trading, registries kept on the blockchain, all these other bits and pieces. There's a lot of mechanics that have to be dealt with, but that kind of broad schema of the architecture to me seems like a sensible approach. Good on this. Look, I don't have any doubt. I think that there's going to be a lot more in this space. I think, as the smart contract world moves along, I was talking to a guy from HSBC the other day, and they've done a smart contract shipment. Right? So I don't know. The old bills of lading are probably bills of lading, letters of credit, all this stuff, all this kind of modern concepts of money, all came out of people trading things, mostly commissions, as I was doing, across borders. And they're already using these similar kind of methodologies. So, this is not revolutionary. Right? This is actually a logical consequence of heaps of cheap computing power. Right? All this stuff exists because computing power has just basically become ubiquitous. Right? Nobody even thinks about the cost of it anymore. So I think there's a great potential. You will see more of it. I think I personally think the real mover will be in the kind of platform space in the next 12 months. It's the people who are looking at providing the mechanisms that are really, something's going to emerge out of there that's going to be pretty dynamic, pretty well. And that's me. Done. Questions?
That's a question for sure. Thank you, Andrew. You're first. We'll make it longer.
So that's great. Australia is pretty difficult to launch an ICO. Where in the world would be the best place, and would you be protected anywhere?
If you want to offer them to Australians, it wouldn't make much difference. At the current stage, there's no kind of passport rules. As I said, there's a problem that the regulation's actually kind of a long way behind. I can't tell you better than that.
Well, I can't realise that. It's difficult. It could be something that happens down the track, like next year or 2 years' time, when you're successful, then you go.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'd have to say the history of people being put in jail for successful ventures is pretty limited. They did try to put Twiggy in jail once for being successful. They didn't go very well. But the more often problem is that they don't go well. That's usually the start. But nobody knows that they're not going to go well. That sort of thing.
Well, I just want to ask you a question about the utility ICO, the application in the Swiss model. I want to understand that applicable in Australia.
No. What I would tell you about the utility model here is the advantage of a utility model is that as long as you don't get caught in the non-cash payment facility definition that I talked about, as long as you can kind of manipulate, not the wrong word, design your product in a way that misses that cash, then you can offer utilities, right? Because you will be outside of the kind of schema of the securities regulation.
Okay, we got next up here.
I just wanted to add to this question, so thank you very much, Andrew. I agree with you. I have noticed as to that cooperative flows use this technology very, very overlay. Now, in the US last year, there's a platform. Cooperatism, is not unknown, and it's in response to the Uberization of a lot of our economic systems and models. However, one of the challenges everyone is talking about is the fact that the bank investment schemes is very, very organized. And I would understand what jurisdiction should I be in. Now, this challenge with the we're Australian that we haven't worked out as much as we yet. So for people who don't know what that is? That's marketing financial instruments that can Europeans and to legislation to harmonise international fund management and fund instruments. And what do you think you're getting at?
Well, I mean, I think it's a problem. I mean, I don't have a kind of magic bullet on this to tell you the truth. As I said at the beginning, I think largely it requires legislatures to kind of wake up and go, we're going to get left behind. There's a kind of global imperative to kind of find a solution to this problem that delivers a minimum acceptable level of consumer protection. I think that I think that there is some scope to move the kind of managed investment model, but it's so rigid in its kind of conceptualisation, right? You know, the only bit that's flexible is the breadth of the definition of financial product, right? But the actual then, when you come back to it, what you've got to try and jam it into, it's very hard. I mean, even in the old days when we were doing limited partnerships, we had this problem of trying to make it work in that kind of context before Taxman killed that. So I think, personally, I think the cooperative model offers the sort of next best hope, but it does require some kind of manipulation and kind of jiggling to make it work.
Yep, right here. Yep. Hi, Andrew. My name's Jacob. So, full disclosure, my understanding of this topic is quite limited, so please bear with me. So, I understand that a lot of utility tokens, they currently sort of masquerade as security tokens in the sense that most of them aren't actually used for the purpose which they're marketed for. So, do you see the split model as resolving that at all, or will similar problems bring them with the distinction between utility and asset ICOs?
I think the problem's going to arise, as I said to you. Somebody's going to start pulling these white papers apart and holding them up to light and look at what the product is, but what was said, and it's not going to be a nice day out. At its heart, that's where the problem sits, I think, right? Whether, how they characterise them. In a sense, the sort of nomenclature is kind of useful because you can put things in buckets and think of them in things away, but ultimately, what you say about them and what they are need to line up, and I suspect a lot of them won't, and I suspect that's exactly what we're talking about. And that's just pretty much fraud, right? It's not clever securities law. If you say this is one thing and it's another, there's plenty of law to get you in trouble on that, right? And Mr. Sims can do it. You don't even need the corporations for it.
Hi, I'm Anthony, first analysis. So what would your policy
I said come back when you've got a product. Because, at this stage, look, actually, I think, frankly, for where he was, that what he needed, he had the coal mine, right? So he's really sort of selling it down. And I was like, well, use your money to kind of see if you can work out how to get it rather than trying to make it work at this stage. But the other side is that, I think that there's probably, the capacity to raise money in that market might be kind of, I don't know. My sense is that we may have seen kind of peak interest and that things might start to wane off in terms of the more adventurous end of the ICO.
Firstly, thank you for your presentation. It's been very interesting. When you talked about managed investment schemes and ICOs, it reminded me a lot of how Australia really screwed up franchising regulation after that famous court decision, I've forgotten what it's called, that said franchises are basically managed investment schemes. On a different note, I'm just wondering that, in the US, they have a much broader definition of what a security is with how we test.
Yeah.
And, we have, I think, Section 92 of the Corporations Act for security. But from what your presentation has talked about with regards to the definition of an MIS or a financial product, are those Australia's Howey tests? And in fact, if they are so broad, it can capture quite a lot.
Yeah, look, I think the Howey test is it's a much more, I think most things that are shares here will fall within the Howey test. And really, it looks a lot more like that. But for us, you've just got an entirely different regime. Because poor Americans don't understand much about equity, so they don't have trusts, right? One of the things that they didn't get after the Boston Tea Party was equity, right? So all of their law is kind of misshapen bits of partnership law. So they don't really have a kind of complex trust arrangement. So they don't have a kind of legislative model like we do. So it's kind of chalk and cheese a bit.
on the platform of blockchain. The three are actually quite intimately connected. I wonder whether, as it with the other people, farming together and a few initiatives in Australia. It's as much a cultural issue, I suspect, in Australia, where the mutual is for individual versus mutual. And in listening to you, I hope you can get a hearing in other quarters in terms of farming community and mutual community. I think there is real value in joining a couple of conversations that I have into a world that I'm working in the agricultural sector. Co-ops are city based. Co-ops are city based. But yeah, I
Conceptually, it fits better, right?
Yeah,
You can
that's
see
what
how.
I'm sitting here a little frustrated in the sense that conceptually it is probably the best fit, but culturally and a raft of other things, there are things going against it.
I think the other piece will be kind of for people to see the kind of tangible potential of the smart contract, right? I think that's the kind of piece too for people like farmers. Like as I was saying to you, this guy I was talking to from HSCB, right? I mean, this is just an amazing idea, right? So basically, you buy a container, you pay. It's got a sealed GPS tag on it. As the container moves from the dock, you get a certain amount out of the smart contract, draws down, bang. As it moves across the equator, gets another piece. Gets another piece when it gets to the end. When the thing goes off the ship, you get the final payment. Right? So, and all of that happens in the contract. Nobody does anything. The GPS just says this is where the container is.
So I'm doing boosters and exporting platform, but I guess so. I have all those but the education of stakeholders, I think, is
Well, it's pretty hard where people still think a digital watch is a neat idea.
I'm not sure if this question is too detailed, but I'm trying to clarity over what's a digital currency and what's not a digital currency, because if you look at the biggest class of digital currency, which is several times bigger than cryptocurrency, is airlines and loyalty miles. Airline miles by themselves are considered between $1 and $2 trillion current valuation in US dollars. Now, I can get an airline voucher issued to me by this program, or I can have it on my phone or do it online. I can pay for airline miles, I can pay for a toaster, I can have it exchanged with cash, and I can buy them with cash. There's an exchange mechanism where I can put them into and have a fiat. So, and that's not regulated by any central bank. So,
Under Australian law, as they stand today, they are a non-cash financial market, and they are regulated, but it's fairly light touch, and it's all basically dealt with as financial product. But as long as there's sort of sufficient connection to the sale of the product, airline tickets, then you fall without it. And the guidelines, there's a published ASIC guidance that sort of tells you what you need to do to kind of fall within it. So
you just said there was handled as a financial product.
it is a financial product, yeah. It's a non-cash payment facility.
Okay.
I do struggle with that a bit, but that's kind of the view that ASIC's taken, so that's where it sits. So I'm not going to argue with it, and I think you'd be fairly brave in the current
It
environment.
suffers inflation too.
We've got one last question here, and then we've got lunch. So.
Thank you, Andrew. Just with the SEC saying fantasy mindset of security, it has to play out for some things like that. With ICOs or utilities, with ICOs advertising that there's a discount or some, I guess, because you've gone to
it's hard to kind of give you a sensible answer in the abstract, but most of what I've seen that have that kind of characteristic look to me a lot like managed investments. You know. And frankly, from my perspective, I'd rather try and make them shares than managed investments, because shares are a hell of a lot easier to deal with, right? Because the prospectus regime is relatively neat and tight. The directors are responsible for it. There's an existing kind of relatively streamlined process. But managed investment, you are taking something that's kind of an apple and trying to squeeze it into an orange box, right? And it's really tough. It's really, when you actually do get down into the real mechanics of how to make it work, if you had a fantastic product and an infinite amount of money, I still think it'd be difficult. But most of what I've seen where they're talking about the kind of pre and post discount look an awful lot like that.
All right, let's thank Andrew Lumsden. Thank you very much. Okay, so we've got a light